Hello fellow patriots, and welcome back to another exciting video on an important topic which needs to be covered and talked about. In this video, we will see whether politics plays an important role in the daily lives of ordinary people. Moreover, we will explore how important is the type of governance that rules over the land and how it affects each citizen. So picture this. You're a young, hardworking university graduate in Vietnam with high hopes to build better lives for you and your future family. Your parents sacrificed so much for your education and for you to be at the top of your class. Foreign companies have invested hundreds of billions of dollars to open up factories to hire millions of young Viet workers. The economy has been averaging over 6% GDP growth rate. Every year, over 18 million tourists cruise into your land to enjoy the stunning views, world-famous Vietnamese cuisine, and a vibrant culture while pouring billions more into Vietnam. Everything seems to be heading in the right direction for Vietnam, but you are doing everything to get a visa to leave the socialist dictatorship of Vietnam for capitalist America, Europe, or Australia. In other words, you seek to become like those tourists, being able to visit and experience the good side of Vietnam for a short time before jetting back to the safety of the US for freedom and justice. And you're not alone, as millions of Vietnamese seek foreign lands to secure better lives for both themselves and their families. But why? Why do so many Viet youths want to leave their birthplace and loved ones behind for distant shores where the cultures, languages, and customs are so alien to them? And why would they still want to leave in spite of improving conditions? What is causing all of this? Stay tuned as we dive into this complex matter and give the simple solution to fix this problem. But first, please hit the like and subscribe buttons. This greatly helps my channel. And be sure to share this video with others who are interested in politics and social studies. Let's begin. When we hear of modern-day Vietnam, the first things that come to mind are the stunning pristine beaches, lush mountains, exciting city nightlives, friendly locals, colorful culture, and of course, the awesome food. As mentioned previously, the economy is growing by leaps and bounds, as evidenced in the ever-changing skylines of Saigon, Hanoi, Haiphong, and a dozen other cities dotting the whole land. According to the World Bank, human capital is the most important asset for any country that wants to be fully developed. Countries like the US and Japan are economic giants because they take full advantage of their human capital. Vietnam is home to 100 million people, with 70% of them falling within the working class age range. That translates to an impressive workforce of 50 to 70 million nation builders. This is a better ratio than Japan's 50%, the United States 55%, and China's 60%. Vietnam is not all brawn though. Its people possess high intelligence and an eye-opening IQ as measured by the Finnish company Wicom, which ranked Vietnam as 9th in the world. Vietnam is the only Southeast Asian nation in the top 10. Viet students both inside and outside of Vietnam do remarkably well by getting into prestigious international universities and winning academic contests. Vietnamese work hard at the office, in factories, and in schools. And as a result, you can clearly see these recent achievements by Vietnamese students. 12 medals at the International Physics Olympiad between 2007 and 2023. A total of 44 gold medals, 54 silver medals, and 49 bronze medals at the International Physics Olympiad from inception to date. Of the 4 participants at the International Biology Olympiad 2024, 3 finished in the top 30 out of 286 total participants. A total of 69 gold medals, 117 silver medals, and 85 bronze medals at the International Math Olympiad from inception to date. Many valedictorians in America are from Vietnamese refugee families. In addition to a large and highly intelligent populace, Vietnam possesses vast oil and gas reserves, together with fertile land for agriculture, tons upon tons of timber, rare earth, and a vast coastline which provides an endless amount of seafood. These are resources that other countries could only wish they have. And last, Vietnam enjoys prime geographical real estate. It's located in close proximity to major economic hubs and Asian markets, making it a key component of the global supply chains and trade routes. In other words, Vietnam is the bridge between East and Southeast Asia. Plus, it has connections to North America, Central America, South America, and Australia via the Pacific Ocean. With all of these advantages, you would naturally be inclined to think that Vietnam easily falls into the top 10 largest economies in the world, where the average citizen earns at least $50,000 USD per year, right? Sadly, nothing can be further from the truth. Today, Vietnam is still a poor country, even though it has been at peace the past 40 years. The average annual salary for Vietnamese workers is a pitiful $4,000. You heard me right. Vietnam is still a low-income nation where the typical Viet makes less than 10% what a person from Mississippi, the poorest American state, makes. On average, Chinese make $13,400 annually. South Koreans make $35,000. Japanese make $40,000 and Singaporeans make $70,000. What a sad heart-stabbing fact for Vietnam. But how can this be? How is Vietnam still underperforming given everything it has to achieve great results? What went wrong? We can all agree that any country and its people would be jumping for joy if they have a fraction of what Vietnam possesses. So what is holding Vietnam back from being as prosperous as South Korea, Singapore, France, or the UK? What went wrong? What is the source of Vietnam's problems? The answer: corrupt and incompetent communist dictatorship. The main reason why we need a government is to protect innocent people, their properties, and the nation. On top of that, the government must be elected by the people themselves and not by anyone else. This is how societies in the free world operate. When they know they are protected, they will gladly spend their time and money to make more money. From there, they build up the country and improve life for everyone. Now let's contrast that with communist Vietnam. Under the communist dictatorship, only the Communist Party has power to rule the land. No other political party is tolerated. If you want to be a politician, you must belong to the party. There is no other way. Lastly, only the top communist elites can pick the top leaders, namely the president and the general secretary of the Communist Party. Ordinary citizens do not have this privilege that is reserved only for the socialist nobility.
Vietnam has 4 pillars of leadership made up of the General Secretary, Prime Minister, President, and Chair of the National Assembly.
At the National Party Congress, delegates will first elect a 200-person Central Committee. The committee will then vote for the Politburo members, who will in turn nominate the country's 4 highest leaders.
The voting process is highly secretive and opaque.
So where are the voices of dissent or different opinions if only the communists can make and pass laws? What if these laws violate the rights of the people? Who will represent and fight for the people against the abusive communist regime? Who will challenge the regime and hold it accountable to the people?
President Obama is criticizing Vietnam's government for its human rights record.
Vietnamese authorities routinely use plainclothes security to keep activists like Dinh Ba Phong from attending meetings or protests. This is a violation of freedom of movement, and it should stop. In this incident, Dinh Ba Phong was beaten by police and released a few hours later.
Quay gì? Quay gì? Mày đánh tao à? Thằng nào đánh nhá? Mày đánh người đâu? Người lên vợ. Mày đánh tao đánh à?
They're extraordinarily sensitive because this is a one-party state. Where is the feedback? Where is the self-affirming vote of the people, public opinion polls, editorials in independent newspapers, even opposition? They have none of that. And so the party feels extremely sensitive.
In December 2021, Dinh Ba Phong was sentenced to 10 years in prison for reporting on land confiscation. Dissidents are also often detained and interrogated when they try to attend meetings abroad or meet with foreign dignitaries in Vietnam.
The conference focused on the continuing suppression of the right of association and the right of peaceful assembly in Vietnam, and of the plight of labour activists Ms. Do Thai Minh Han, Mr. Don Hoi Chung, and Ms. Nguyen Huang Quoc Hung, who have all suffered harsh and unjust jail terms for simply defending the rights of fellow workers. Mr. Deputy Speaker, basic human rights, such as the right of association and the right of peaceful assembly, are still suppressed in Vietnam.
Nguyen Quang Nga has been detained or put under house arrest more than 24 times in the past 8 years. In this incident, he was stopped from going to a public protest.
Hôm nay là cái gì?
Là chú đừng có đi đâu cả, chú ở nhà cho nó khỏe, tội gì?
Bây giờ cậu kia.
Con này sao làm như thế? Sao con làm như thế?
Tôi không có chuyện gì cả.
Bác ít nhất là phải có cái quyền tự do. Bác ơi, chúng mày làm bác như tội phạm, bác đi việc của bác. Bác không đi biểu tình, bác có việc bác phải đi.
When he was invited to meet with U.S. President Barack Obama in 2016, state security shoved Nguyen Quang Nga into a car and drove around for several hours. So he missed the meeting.
I should note that there were several other activists who were invited, who were prevented from coming for various reasons.
In the free world, citizens have freedom of speech to express their opinions, practice their religion, and voice their concerns in churches, on the streets, in the press, in courts of law, in meetings, and in front of their elected officials. These are God-given rights that no one person or government can take away. In Communist Vietnam, the Communist Party has the final word on what Vietnamese people can say, write, or organize anything. If people do not like the fact that the government has been stealing their land or business and kicking them out of their own property, they have no way to write about it in the newspapers, voice it on the radio, share it on the internet, or protest on the streets. Since the Communist Party either owns these media outlets or has influence over them, it will immediately censor the press and send the police to beat up peaceful protesters.
In another incident, the police used furniture to block the car of religious freedom activist He Phi when he was set to meet with a U.S. delegation in Ho Chi Minh City.
Kính thưa tất cả dư luận thế giới, bây giờ tôi đang đi Sài Gòn nè, với lại cái xe của tôi đây rõ ràng nè, nghĩa là người ta đang canh đằng trước đây nè, người ta đang canh đằng trước đây, đang chuẩn bị đi Sài Gòn, nhưng đi ra đây thì người ta lại chặn. Tôi sẽ tiếp tục đưa tin.
Authorities have also used padlocks to keep dissidents at home. These practices are so common, activists joke that it's like they're eating guard soup. Freedom of movement is a human right. Vietnam, don't lock critics up.
4 thằng. Các bạn có biết không, 4 thằng thanh niên. 4 thằng như con trâu. Nó chặn xe lại, nắm cổ mình, nó quăng xuống đất, đánh vô mặt, nó đánh mình bất tỉnh.
Activists in Vietnam face retaliation for their activities. And in recent years, we've seen a rise in the number of people who are being physically attacked by groups of thugs who appear to work in connivance with the police.
Họ thường đánh tập trung vào phần mang tai, thái dương, đầu, xương sườn, xương sống và phần phổi.
When activists report attacks to the police, very little happens. There are hardly any investigations, there are hardly any consequences for the thugs who perpetrated the attacks. In many cases, people believe that the thugs are probably working with the police.
Trên từ 20 mét đến từ chỗ tôi đứng đến cổng công an phường 20 mét là tôi nhận rất là nhiều đánh đập người vô cớ của các lực lượng an ninh hoặc thường phục.
One should remember that this is a one-party state where expression and activities are controlled by the government, and the internet provides the only outlet for activists to be able to say what's happening, to describe the injuries they've gotten, and to demand that the international community pressure Vietnam to stop the attacks.
And forget about suing the government, since the Communist Party also owns the courts. You can be sure you will lose the case even before stepping in front of the judge. It's like suing a thief when he is also the guy wearing the black robe. How do you like that? How can the people win against such injustice? So how can the people have any trust to invest their money to open up any meaningful business if they fear it can be stolen from them without any recourse? Either you join the Communist Party to protect yourself, your family, and business, or risk having the party take everything away on fake charges. And sometimes even joining the party may not help you if your property is too tempting for the greedy communists to steal. In the free world, the police and military are under the control of the people to protect them from criminals. In communist dictatorships, even these are controlled by the Communist Party, not to protect the Vietnamese people, but to protect the Communist Party while committing crimes against them. In other words, the criminals are in charge and will use force against their victims, the people. If citizens have to suffer for the party to survive, then the police and military will do everything to make the people suffer so the handful of communist elites can continue to rule. The lives of ordinary citizens are of no concern to the socialist elites.
This citizen video shows a violent clash last month between police and farmers near Vietnam's capital, Hanoi. The villagers are trying to prevent authorities from confiscating their land for a massive real estate development project. Sources told RFA that about 5 villagers were arrested. Authorities began seizing the Dong Noi property 5 years ago, but villagers say the seizure is illegal. Hundreds of families have refused compensation, saying the amount they have been offered is inadequate. Dong Noi villagers have staged numerous demonstrations to protest the land confiscation. A few dozen gathered at a Hanoi police station this week to call for the release of farmers arrested in last month's clash.
The land that my family inherited from our ancestors for 1,000 generations has been taken. Because of greed, the authorities have acted inhumanely. We ask the Public Security Ministry to release our innocent villagers.
Unrest linked to land seizures has become increasingly common as Vietnam pursues market-oriented economic reforms.
In communist doctrine, there is no tolerance of and protection for private property. In other words, those in power can easily call in the police and military to enter people's homes and businesses, to seize them, graze them to the ground, and sell the land to real estate developers for millions. Countless Vietnamese have had their farms, land, homes, and businesses be snatched right under their feet by these communist criminals without any compensation. And forget about owning guns or weapons like in America to protect yourself. Guns are outlawed since we can't have grandma fight for her house from being stolen from the greedy communist thieves, can we? With everything we have seen, is it any wonder why Vietnam hasn't achieved the status of a first world country? Is it any wonder why millions of Vietnamese had already left and millions more want to leave this communist hellhole for free capitalist societies like America, Europe, South Korea, Canada, and Australia? And many Vietnamese are leaving not through visas but through marriage arrangements. As of 2024, there have been over 300,000 Vietnamese women who married either Vietnamese men living in foreign lands or foreign men. I personally know at least 9 Vietnamese men here in America who have found Vietnamese wives to bring back to America. Because of all the corruption and incompetence of the ruling communist dictatorship, these poor Vietnamese women have to look abroad for a better future. This is a big crime of the Communist Party against Vietnamese females. This is also a serious problem for Vietnam for the following reasons. First, these Viet ladies will generally move abroad to be with their husbands and deprive Vietnam of the much-needed labor force that it needs to grow to be a developed nation. Second, with 300,000 women marrying foreign men, who will marry Vietnamese men? This is especially alarming because Vietnam is experiencing a low birth rate of only 1.94 as of 2022, and this number will continue to decrease. Remember that you need a birth rate of 2.1 for each couple for a population to remain the same. Anything lower than that will result in a shrinking population. Think South Korea, Japan, China, and Europe, where this problem is causing the people there lots of headaches with no solution in sight. With more Viet ladies marrying men abroad, Vietnam's population crisis will only worsen. How can you have a country if there were fewer people living in it? How can there be a future if there will be no one around? Another way to leave Vietnam involves tales of hypocrisy and elitism. Each year, around 4,500 Vietnamese buy foreign citizenship, and the cost can be very high, ranging from $500,000 USD to the millions. It is rumored that every single high-ranking communist official has dual citizenships with America, Canada, Europe, Australia, or New Zealand. And the first poster child is National Assembly Deputy Phạm Phú Quốc, who is believed to have spent $2.5 million to obtain Cypriot citizenship for him and his whole family in 2018. The National Assembly is the Vietnamese version of the US Congress. He spent $2.5 million to get the foreign passport. How much is the average salary of a Vietnamese worker again? Makes you wonder where he got all the corruption money, doesn't it? Another poster child is National Assembly member Nguyễn Thị Nguyệt Hương, who spent over $1 million to buy Maltese citizenship for her and her whole family in 2016. Again, where did she get all her corruption money? And these are not even the tip of the shameful iceberg, as socialist criminals do not want anyone to know about their hypocrisy. Again, there are reports that all the top communist leaders have foreign passports. It's not any surprise that the socialist elites desperately need these passports when the time comes, when the Vietnamese people will finally rise up and overthrow the much-hated dictators. Think, communist dictator Nicolae Ceausescu of Romania in 1989. It's a no-brainer to see that the Vietnamese communists learned a lot from the executions of their Romanian comrades. When things get a little turbulent back home in the near future, they can simply jet out of Vietnam to their predetermined foreign destinations where they own beach homes and villas that they have acquired with stolen blood money. And lastly, for those who are not fortunate to buy citizenship, there is always the option of entering capitalist nations illegally. Already the number of Vietnamese crossing the US border has reached an all-time record high, from less than 300 per year to over 3,000.
But now a wave of undocumented Vietnamese people is aiming to enter the U.S. through its southern border. The number caught by U.S. Customs and Border Protection jumped from just under 300 in 2022 to more than 3,000 in 2023.
Họ cũng kể qua họ đi từ đâu, họ đi từ Huế bay vô tới phi trường Sài Gòn, tới phi trường Tân Sơn Nhất. Rồi từ đó họ mới bắt đầu bay qua Turkey xong rồi họ mới đi từ đó tới Nam Mỹ, bắt đầu lấy xe lửa từ Mexico tới xuống biên giới San Diego. Rồi họ mới lấy những cái xe bus mà chở tới biên giới, thì mất gần 2 tháng.
Sadly, the pattern repeats in Europe as Vietnamese are now the single largest ethnicity that is illegally crossing the English Channel.
First, with immigration one of the key issues of the election campaign, a special report now on the gangs targeting Vietnamese migrants. That nationality now makes up the largest number of migrants illegally entering the UK on small boats.
And new data published today shows for the first time ever, it is Vietnamese who are the single largest group now crossing the channel.
If Vietnam has a much better government that is competent and clean, millions of Vietnamese wouldn't need to be risking their lives to escape communism along with the poverty and violence that it brings. Again, every Vietnamese that leaves will only worsen Vietnam's population crisis, as these immigrants will not be able to replace the lost numbers of future workers. And to make matters worse, Vietnam is becoming an aging nation, as the percentage of elderlies will increase over the next decades. And that's the everyday life for millions of young people in Vietnam who are being drained of their patriotism by a government that cares about nothing but itself and its monopoly on power. If Vietnam is to achieve even a fraction of the success that economists and researchers have predicted in the past, it must first tackle a cankerworm that is pushing its young people away from caring about the politics of their homeland. All people must be reminded about the importance of politics and the role it plays in the success or failure of all nations. Every developed nation has had its times of turbulence, and it took the bravery and political dexterity from its young people to change the situation and set their country on the path to greatness. And yes, many times the prices of freedom and prosperity must be paid by blood and uprisings, because freedom is never free. For Vietnam to achieve similar greatness, young people must take their roles as nation builders. And the one way to do this is to participate in politics, to choose leaders and demand these leaders do the right things. Vietnamese must find the courage to speak out and stand up against all the lies, cover-ups, and abuses of the communist regime. Organize into groups to take to the streets plus voice concerns and frustrations on the radio, internet, newspapers, and television. But especially take to the streets like the brave Eastern Europeans did in 1988, who brought down the hated communist dictators of those countries. The painful reality on the ground for Vietnamese people is that they have to work extra hard every day to make a living, while their self-appointed leaders do little to help while doing anything to steal more corruption money. Wide income disparities, corruption, an aging population, pollution, poor infrastructure, extreme poverty, and high unemployment in rural areas plus low wages are some of the issues regular citizens have to deal with because of government incompetence and apathy. It's easy to see why young people are growing impatient with their current situation. To better illustrate how deep communist corruption has penetrated into Vietnamese society, we need to look at these two examples. First is the enormous banking scandal of Trương Mỹ Lan and her family. She and her whole family are all Chinese who stole $45 billion USD via banking fraud. Did you hear that? These Chinese criminals stole $45 billion or 10% of Vietnam's GDP. To get some perspective, if they live in America and stole 10% of America's GDP, that would a massive $2.7 trillion. And remember that Bernie Madoff only stole $18 billion, while Sam Bankman-Fried only stole $11 billion. This Chinese family of thieves makes both these American scammers look like child's play. Trương Mỹ Lan and all her family members have been arrested, and she will get the death penalty if found guilty. Now ask yourself this question. Do you think they could have carried out this big theft all by themselves without the help of government officials and tons of money under the table? And do you think the government is giving her the death penalty to silence her so she won't be naming communist officials who were involved? Think about it. The second example takes a tragic turn at something that continues to occur on a daily basis. Rural communities constantly face child kidnappings, trafficking, and sales that threaten the safety of children, especially girls. All these kidnapped young girls end up in China, where they become sex slaves or are forced into disgusting marriages with men who no one wants. The communist authorities all know about it but don't care about the safety of their own people. Again, they're just too busy stealing money to care. Perhaps the most tragic and worrying sign of an impending economic disaster for Vietnam is in the loss of its biggest assets to more economically viable countries. Undergraduates, university graduates, family breadwinners, PhD holders, and highly accomplished and specialized professionals are turning their backs on Vietnam and moving to much better nations that offer them greater opportunities in education, employment, viable infrastructure, and environment for better lives. Business owners suffer from lack of property protection plus tons of corruption. This corruption leads to a lack of transparency and creates bureaucracies that frustrate Vietnam's entrepreneurship spirit. The resulting brain drain further depletes the manpower available in Vietnam and slows down the nation's rise towards development. The reason for this exodus is not far-fetched. Locals increasingly find themselves being limited by the unfriendly laws and harsh business environment that were created by a government that puts its people last while finding every way to make people pay more and more corruption money. If this continues, only poorly educated and unskilled people will remain in Vietnam. This will result in a shortage of professionals across important and highly specialized sectors like healthcare, engineering, and high-tech, amongst others. It's hard enough to try to develop a country when the government continues to fail its people. Now imagine how much harder it would be if the country has lost most of its best hands and heads to foreign shores. Add to that the aging factor, which I covered before, and Vietnam's problems are compounded even further. At this rate, Vietnam will become old before it becomes rich. Vietnam's window of opportunity is rapidly closing by the day, and the Vietnamese people must stand up and change the situation before this window completely shuts tight. Time is ticking really fast. It's crucial for the Vietnamese people to start working towards changing the status quo. They gain nothing from the current setup, so the onus is on them to rise up and demand changes. Here's my strategy for social changes in Vietnam. Citizens must organize into action groups to break free from the shackles of the oppressive communist system. They must be ready to sacrifice everything, including their own lives, to save Vietnam from the toxic doom of communism. For inspiration, they must look at and study what happened in Czechoslovakia, East Germany, Bulgaria, Yugoslavia, Poland, Hungary, the Soviet Union, and Albania during the late 1980s. Citizens defied the socialist dictatorships and engaged in protests demanding an end to communism. After years of protests and continuously refusing the government's offers of a compromise, the gigantic communist beast fell and free multi-party elections were held. Thanks God these were relatively peaceful revolutions because those in power listened to the people. Now contrast that with what happened in Romania in 1989, where the communist leaders ordered their soldiers to shoot at their own people. In the end, those same troops turned their guns against the communist dictators. Demand free multi-party elections like those in America, Canada, South Korea, Japan, and Europe. These elections must be closely monitored by independent observers for any signs of tampering or fraud. Vietnamese people must draw inspiration from these brave souls and fight for similar victories in their homeland. They must not despair and must not fall for fake promises. The communists always love to lie about them representing the people of Vietnam and how the people love the party. If that's the case, then they should have no reason to fear free multi-party elections. If the people truly love the party, then let's put it to the test and see where the people really put their hearts when they finally get the chance to vote in free elections. Free world countries must play important roles in making this happen. Nations like the United States, with a high number of Vietnamese refugees, must apply diplomatic pressure to the regime in Vietnam to soften its stance or be ostracized on the international stage. Loans and grants sent to Vietnam must carry conditions and clauses that mandate the regime relaxes its hard grip on the Vietnamese economy and people. It is well known that money can make many things happen. So if you live in these free societies, lend a big helping hand to the Vietnamese people by demanding your elected officials punish human rights abuses in Vietnam in any way possible, especially via foreign aid and loans. When you hit them where it hurts, even the most tyrannical despots will be afraid. At this point, I would like to introduce an organization which has been leading the way to exposing human rights abuses in Vietnam to the eyes of the world. Boat People SOS, headed by my very good friend Nguyễn Đình Thắng. My family has been financially supporting Boat People SOS the past 2 decades, and I myself have the honor to volunteer for this great organization, as it has rescued over 25,000 refugees, victims of child trafficking, exploited workers, and persecute religious prisoners of conscience. Anyone can freely join us as we visit members of Congress and lobby our government to put more pressure on the communist dictatorship in Vietnam to stop abusing people and to honor the most basic human rights. We have offices in California, Georgia, the Gulf Coast, Texas, Virginia, and even in Thailand. This nonprofit organization also provides social services for seniors, income tax assistance, youth education, domestic violence victims, natural disaster relief, occupational health training, and many more programs. So if you want to see your efforts and resources be put to effective use, Boat People SOS is the best place for this to happen, as it has yielded tremendous results since 1980. You can visit its website at bpsos.org. I will provide the link below. All volunteers are welcome to come and help, especially high school students looking to fulfill your extra curriculum requirements for college. Back to our main discussion. Since a whopping 94% of Vietnam's GDP is from exporting goods to other countries, we can use this as leverage to pressure the communist dictatorship to give Vietnamese people more freedom. We must threaten to put high tariffs or even impose total boycott of all Vietnamese exports if free multi-party elections will not be held. If Vietnam cannot sell its products, millions will be out of work and will blame the incompetent regime for their hard lives. Imagine seeing these millions on the streets of all Vietnamese cities and towns demanding an end to communism like in Eastern Europe 35 years ago. All of this is possible without firing one shot or anyone getting hurt. So let's get to it. Another great way foreigners can help motivate Vietnamese people to make a change is to talk to them directly. Currently, there are millions of Vietnamese students and tourists coming to America, South Korea, Japan, Canada, Europe, Australia, and New Zealand each year. When we see them, warmly greet and tell them how much you love the beauty of Vietnam, her culture and people. Follow through by saying how much you admire the hardworking Vietnamese people and the enormous sacrifice they make for their families. Continue by saying that you feel so bad because in spite of all their hard work, the Vietnamese workers are still paid very low wages while suffering from communist dictatorship. Because of that, Vietnamese must have the right to criticize their government, to have their private properties be protected from government theft, and to have a brighter future without being arrested and beaten. Tell them that this is extremely unfair, that while others have these freedoms but Viets don't, and that they deserve much better lives. And lastly, finish it off by motivating them to demand change when they come back to Vietnam. Encourage them to enter politics to make those changes and bring justice and better living conditions for all Vietnamese. Give them more encouragement by reminding them how Eastern Europeans liberated themselves from communism just 35 years ago. Even the Soviet Union, the very birthplace of communism, no longer exists. If Eastern Europeans and Russians can topple communism, so can Vietnamese people. The same can be done when we visit Vietnam as tourists, exchange students, or business professionals. We can simply say the same thing to motivate Vietnamese to fight for their God-given rights and enjoy more meaningful lives. When enough people hear the same message, they will be encouraged to act and start a social revolution. You will be surprised how simple words like these will move mountains. Practice what I just laid out before talking to the next Vietnamese student or tourist you meet. Let's get to it. So here's the quick recap of things to say when meeting our Vietnamese friends, classmates, relatives, and associates. 1. Kindly greet and tell them how much you love Vietnam. 2. Tell them how much you admire the hard work and sacrifices of Vietnamese. 3. Share your sadness when seeing the low salaries and lack of freedom that Vietnamese must suffer. 4. Encourage them to stand up and fight for freedom. 5. Remind them of the revolutions that topple communism in Eastern Europe and how Viets can also achieve the same results. Let's practice saying this to make our speech sound very natural and smooth whenever we meet Vietnamese folks. Vietnam is a great nation with hardworking people plus so much potential to be greater. But this can happen if and only if Vietnamese people abandon their apathy and have the courage to take responsibility by participating in politics and contributing to making a difference in society. If no one does anything, Vietnam will continue to sink deeper down the road to poverty while losing more productive citizens to distant shores. The more people avoid politics, the more confident the government gets in maintaining the status quo. And in a place where there's no critic or dissenting voice, it's hard to predict any other outcome but economic disaster. More people will be impoverished, less and less people will be educated, and families will continue to be pushed by desperation to engage in practices that put their children at risk. To be fair, the economy is growing, but only with hundreds of billions of dollars from foreign companies pouring investment into Vietnam. Also, the people themselves love to work to build better lives for their families. On top of that, Vietnam has plenty of fertile land and a vast coastline for agriculture and seafood cultivation. And last, Vietnam has been blessed by God with tons of natural resources as described before. Without these 4 factors, Vietnam will be another dirt poor and starving North Korea with millions lying dead everywhere. So we can clearly see the Communist Party has absolutely nothing to do with Vietnam's rise. On the contrary, it has been keeping Vietnam down by sucking its blood and life like one big vampire. And this dangerous, cancerous monster needs to be removed before it kills Vietnam and the Vietnamese people. So we end by answering my first question. Does the type of governance matter in the daily lives of citizens? Absolutely. Politics matters a lot. Being governed by either free or authoritarian politicians is the difference between life and death. As proof, you can clearly see the shocking difference between Vietnamese who live under communist dictatorship in Vietnam versus Vietnamese who live under free capitalist systems elsewhere. In America, there are 2.3 million Vietnamese refugees who are one of the most successful people after coming here with absolutely nothing. Through hard work and failure is not an option mentality. Vietnamese Americans have built up whole thriving communities from nothing. Just in California alone, there are at least 7 Little Saigons, with a total of 35 across all of America. Vietnamese Americans have a median household income of $88,500, which is higher than that of the overall U.S. population of $83,000, according to the U.S. Census Bureau. They are also more likely to own homes than other Asian Americans. Hundreds of thousands of businesses started by Vietnamese refugees are flourishing across America, ranging from high-tech companies, law firms, hotels, real estate developments, restaurants, nail salons, and pharmacies. Not bad for war refugees who were robbed of everything they had by communists 50 years ago. Now compare that with the average Vietnamese worker in Vietnam, who only makes $4,000 per year and lives in poverty. No contest. Currently, there are 9 Vietnamese American billionaires versus only 5 billionaires in communist Vietnam. 9 billionaires out of 2.3 million refugees versus only 5 billionaires out of a total population of 100 million. That means free Vietnamese Americans are 78 times more successful than Vietnamese living under and suffering from communism. This clearly shows the importance of having freedom, transparency, rule of law, and justice, things which can never be found under any corrupt communist dictatorship. And we see this not only in Vietnam, but in many parts of the world, across all races, nationalities, cultures, and religions. There is no doubt that communism stifles the progress of nations. No evidence illustrates this better than the interesting contrast between West and East Germany following the Second World War, after the two went their separate ways. West Germany chose to be a free market economy modeled after the United States, the United Kingdom, and France. On the other hand, East Germany was infatuated by the old Soviet Union and opted to go communist. In the 1950s and 1960s, West Germany recorded immense economic growth, while communist East Germany suffered. It got so bad that East Germans were willing to risk their very lives to flee the oppressive socialist regime. Hence, the Berlin Wall was built to keep the communist slaves from escaping.
About 20% of the East German population had emigrated to the West, worsening East Germany's already not so bright labor force situation. Life in East Germany was marked by scarcity and limited consumer goods, a sharp contrast to the prosperity seen in the West.
Products that were difficult to produce or imported were hard to find. When shops got bananas or oranges, people had to wait in a long line, but a lot of them had to leave empty-handed.
East Germans had access to few luxuries, and basic consumer goods like cars, household appliances, and even fresh produce were often hard to find.
By 1961, more than 2.5 million people had left East Germany, including nearly 1 million workers.
It's really important to remember, almost everyone moved from the east to the west, and almost no one moved from the west to the east.
It's no wonder that the communist East Germany collapsed and ceased to exist, while the free capitalist West Germany continues to thrive today. By the time both countries united in 1990, the gap between West and East Germany had grown substantially. According to a Pew Research paper in as late as 2019, areas that made up old East Germany have seen some development in the last few years, but still struggle when compared with areas in the Free West. Some examples include 1. Unemployment rate in Western Germany, 8.5% in 2005 versus 18.4% for Eastern Germany. 2. Eastern Germans still make only 86% of what Western Germans make today. 3. Workers in all the former East German states still make around 30k euros, while those in the richest West Germany state, Bavaria, make over 47k euros per year. 4. Not a single East German company can be found in the country's stock exchange. 5. Hardly a single major company has a headquarters in Eastern Germany. The same people who speak the same language, practice the same culture, and share the same history, but just different political governances. And what a big difference politics makes. It's the same story in South and North Korea. South Korea operates a capitalist free market economy while North Korea is an isolated country under tight control by a communist dictator. Economically, the difference is just as stark. While the South Korean economy is one of the world's most advanced and productive, North Korea slowly crawls by each day to survive. The World Bank estimates that as recently as 2017, more than half of North Korea lack access to electricity. A 2011 U.S. Census Bureau report estimated the number of starvation deaths from 1993 to 2000 to be between 500,000 and 600,000, while other researchers put the number to be as high as 3 million. Because of the constant cover-ups of their failures, the communists will never reveal the true figure. Again, the same people who speak the same language, practice the same culture, and share the same history, but just different political governances. And boy, what a big difference politics makes. Cubans in America also share the same language, history, music, and culture from their siblings in Cuba. The only difference is, of course, the type of government each group lives under. Can you guess how the two groups fare? Since 1959, Cuba has been under the brutal socialist dictatorship of the Castro family and its cronies. They ruled the land with an iron rod and turned it into one of the most poorest nations on earth. Blackouts are daily occurrences, as is hunger among the population. 72% of Cubans live below the poverty line, and 21% of them often have to skip breakfast, lunch, or dinner due to lack of money, according to a 2022 report from the Cuban Human Rights Observatory, OCDH. In a 2024 Statista survey, around 19% had monthly incomes less than $67 USD, and only 21% had incomes higher than $417 USD. The same survey found that 61% of the respondents stated it is a painful struggle for them to buy the most basic necessities to survive. While the average Cuban suffers, the communist dictator Fidel Castro had his own private island, private mansion, private fleet of luxury cars, private 85-foot yacht, and private wealth of $900 million. So much for socialist equality. Each year, thousands of desperate Cubans gamble their lives away by fleeing Cuba on inflated tire tubes or on overcrowded boats to get to Florida. And who can blame them for escaping socialism? The Cuban-American relatives they want to reunite with, on the other hand, are one of the most successful and well-assimilated refugees in America. They own businesses, work in high-end companies, are professionals, and are famous politicians like Senators Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz. I want to point out that Cuba, before the communist takeover, was a prosperous playground for the American elites, complete with Art Deco buildings, wide boulevards, classical cars, luxury apartments, and villas that easily rival those of America and Europe. And this is communist Cuba today.
It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and it's crumbling. Old Havana was founded in 1519 and was once the largest port in the Caribbean. But now many houses are falling apart. Fernando Ramirez Mendoza says the ceiling collapsed just before we arrived.
Te van a arrebatar el...
It hits people on the streets as well when it falls down?
Sí, claro, si proyecta y hay alguien pasando, le puede ocurrir un accidente, le puede matar a la persona.
Last year alone, one building collapsed in Havana every second day.
And Venezuela has been following Cuba's footsteps. Venezuela is the latest Spanish-speaking Latin American country made miserably poor by socialism. Before 1999, the country enjoyed a first world status due to its vast proven oil reserves. No other country in the world has more oil than Venezuela. Very similar to that of Cuba when it had a free market economy, the nation thrived with modern skyscrapers, wide streets, millions of vehicles, a world-class subway, and institutes that would impress even Americans and Europeans. All was not entirely perfect, but Venezuelans were generally well off and had high hopes for the future. And then everything changed. In 1999, a socialist leader named Hugo Chavez came to power and introduced vast changes. Campaigning on erasing the inequality gap, he used this as his raison d'etre to lead Venezuela down the road to socialism. Notice that all left-wingers always love to point out problems within society to solve, but end up making them worse later on, as we will see. One of the first items on his agenda was to set price controls on certain food products to enable the poor to buy more of them. This unfortunately led to food shortages and hoarding. Empty shelves were now appearing as shoppers had fewer items to purchase. It got worse when he set minimum production quotas for 12 of these food items. This meant the government was forcing business people and farmers to produce food at a loss. Now, empty shelves have outnumbered well-stocked shelves in all shops throughout this oil-rich land, and Venezuelans have to stand in long lines for hours just to buy diapers and meat.
Meat disappeared. There is no meat anywhere.
This shopper have been waiting more than 10 hours outside this store after she looked for meat in 6 different supermarkets.
Either you eat meat or you don't eat anything. So Venezuelans don't eat anything because there's nothing.
I'm with a 2-year-old lining up, having to put up with this. She tells me we have no milk, we have no diapers, nothing. This is impossible, she pleads. She says she left her home at 4 a.m., like many here, waiting for government rations that are dwindling, ravaged by hyperinflation, government mismanagement.
This, the new reality for mothers and pregnant women hoping to snag baby products at affordable prices. Long lines, chaos, frustration.
We are hungry, we have needs, we have no food. Look at this line. Mothers who are hungry, we need food, medicine. We can't find anything. What's finishing us off? Hunger, she says.
You can't find eggs. You can't find meat. To buy chicken, you have to make a huge line. I'm old. I can't do the lines.
But Hugo Chavez didn't stop there. Oh no! He then nationalized, which is a nice way of saying he stole private property using the means of big government, the following corporations: large farms, supermarkets, a seaport, cement companies, telephone companies, electric utilities, a steel company, a food plant, rice processing plants, and banks. Notice that Hugo Chavez was merely following the socialist playbook by seizing the means of production of all industries. It only took communism 1 generation to transform both rich Cuba and Venezuela into destitute and impoverished countries. How scary and sad. And this was exactly what the communists in Vietnam did after they violently stole power 70 years ago. What are the results of all this? Massive food shortages, a 60% drop in cement production, daily blackouts throughout the country, and a poverty rate of over 91%. Inflation in 2019 was a whopping 300,000%, while the GDP growth rate was negative 30% in 2020. Venezuelans now struggle to live to the next day as they are unable to afford the most basic goods and services. Again, Venezuela went from a first world country to a third world one within just a generation of socialism, and this was achieved in peacetime. The country was neither invaded nor suffered from a civil war. It was brought down by bad government policies and nothing else. Sad fact here: while the average Venezuelan is now dirt poor, Hugo Chavez amassed $1 billion when he died in 2013, and his family's asset is around $2 billion. The Venezuelan socialist elites can be seen vacationing in Europe, sipping expensive wine and dining on $2,000 meals as their poor subjects starve back home. How typical of socialists and communists. Once again, this is the current socialist president of Venezuela, Maduro, enjoying a $2,000 meal at Salt BAE while millions of Venezuelans starve. And this is the current communist dictator of Vietnam, Tô Lâm, enjoying the same $2,000 meal at Salt BA while 100 million Vietnamese only make $15 a day. These are your typical socialist and communist elites who claim to fight for the poor. Because of their poor choice in choosing socialism, millions of Venezuelans have been suffering daily since 1999. It has gotten so bad that over 7 million Venezuelans can no longer live in their motherland and have left for greener pastures. That accounts for about 25% of the population. In other words, 1 out of every 4 people had escaped this socialist nightmare to be citizens in other countries. And many of them braved dangerous jungles, criminal gangs, and harsh elements to sneak across our southern border. Currently, there are over 500,000 Venezuelans who are living in America because our free capitalist Republican values offer them both economic opportunities and individual freedoms, things which socialism can never tolerate nor provide. In conclusion, we can clearly see how bad government policies can doom entire countries and people. This should wake us all up and motivate everyone to wisely choose our leaders. We must all stand up and demand our officials protect the citizens or else face the wrath of the people. Please fight for the peoples of Vietnam, Venezuela, Cuba, North Korea, and elsewhere. May God grant us victory over communist tyranny. Amen. So what do you have to say about the importance of governance? Please share with me your opinions and thoughts because I would love to hear from as many different points of view as possible. All productive comments are welcome. On a closing note, I would like to briefly leave this list as a reminder on how we all can have a big impact on bringing freedom to Vietnam simply by talking to people. Thanks for your help.